So it's nice to be back here in the yurt with everybody. Good to see y'all. I just got back this week from a 2 week tour with a group I sing in. And it's always a rich experience traveling and touring with the group. Um, and towards the end of it, in the second week, I started to notice that I was getting the same feeling working with these guys, um, getting the same feeling that I get during session. Session being like intensive meditation practice for those of you uh, who don't know. And so I thought that was curious, like why is singing a cappella at a state fair giving me the same feeling that I get during session? These are two very different activities. And so I started thinking about it. And for one, you kind of, in both situations, you kind of give up creature comforts, right? So there's four of us in the group, and on the tour, we're like sharing rooms and we're sharing bathrooms, and you're kind of not in your own element, sleeping on cots. At one point, we were three of us sleeping in a small camper van. So for 2 weeks, you're kind of like giving up a lot of the regular creature comforts that I'm used to. And then particularly in the second half of my tour, we were at the fair, like I said, and so we had a kind of strict schedule. You wake up, you get to the fair at like 10 a.m. We were there until 8 p.m. So it's like these long days at the fair. We have 5 or 6 different sets throughout the day, all at the same time. So it's like this very kind of regimented schedule, which, you wouldn't think that singing doo-wop shoo-bop bop is particularly grueling, but when you do it over and over again, day after day, it can get kind of grueling. And so that kind of fatigue, that kind of repetition, that kind of like, even when you don't want to, you have to show up on stage, just like you have to show up on the cushion when you make that commitment to do session. And so that was kind of like starting to make sense, why I would be getting that feeling. But then most importantly, was the practice of being with this kind of Sangha, right? I am with these three other guys constantly for 2 weeks, eating meals, driving, working, dealing with upset stomachs, dealing with troubles at home, and you're always together. And yeah, you can kind of like go away, get a moment by yourself, but pretty much there's this kind of tacit understanding that you are there together and that the solidarity of the group makes it possible. And that to me was just it really did feel like Sangha practice. Really, harmony is such an appropriate phrase here because we're an a cappella group. So like literally we're creating harmony, but also to engage in that practice of creating interpersonal harmony is difficult. And it really made me think of, Sangha here and having a group to practice with. The importance of, that practice of being together, knowing that we're all bringing our baggage, we're all bringing our stuff, we're all bringing our limitations, and trying to be authentic and honest, and keep the peace is a very difficult practice. And so I was just really aware of that with them. And then I came home, and overnight, just in an instant, it went from constant group stuff to, I live alone here. Most of the work I do is alone here. The meditation we do is silent here. And so I was just so very aware of this like loud, boisterous singing guys, they kind of like a locker room all the time. They're kind of loud and very broy, regardless of what you may think of a cappella groups. This one's pretty broy. And then to all of a sudden just come back to this very lone, quiet life of, pretty much solitude was very stark. And one of the things I noticed, which hopefully we all notice when we come to practice, was how powerful that is, that silence, that aloneness, how powerful and how effective it is in allowing our stuff to come up, right? I noticed immediately how loud my mind was. And as powerful as that group practice was when I was with them for the 2 weeks, I noticed that my mind, was able to kind of be distracted a lot more. And when I came back to myself here, the mind was just very loud. Not necessarily busier, because even when you're with people and doing things, your mind is always busy. But that silence really allows for the amplification of what's going on inside of us, in our minds, in our hearts, in our spirits. And it just kind of, that contrast really struck me uh, in the sense that both of them are so essential to, I guess in my opinion, so essential to the practice of waking up. You can't have just one. The importance of grinding up against other people, noticing how other people's preferences contrast with mine and how that creates discord, and how to navigate that is equally important in our practice as silence and solitude. Um, and then I started noticing and appreciating how Zen practice as we do it here, and particularly Sesshin practice, for those of you who have done Sesshin, Sesshin really does allow both of those things at the same time really well, right? If you come and do Sesshin, you are both with people all the time. You're eating your meals together. You're following the same schedule together. You're sharing bathrooms in a lot of cases together. You really are kind of bumping up against folks. That's kind of the nature of it. And at the same time, you're sitting in silence, alone with your thoughts and your heart for hours and hours and hours at a time. And so I just really kind of gained a new appreciation for how, at least Zen Buddhism as I know it here with Sweetwater, is designed to really highlight and allow both of those practices at the same time. And, in kind of a way, as I was thinking about it, this is a little bit stretching it, but in a way, it kind of highlights this phenomenon that we talk about of the absolute and the relative. I know we talk about that to death in these Dharma talks and in all of the things you'll read about Zen and Buddhism. But it is kind of, an interesting parallel that this aloneness, this silent time that we take to meditate, is really to encourage intimacy and to cultivate a relationship with the absolute reality of oneness, emptiness, vast spaciousness. And, there might be other ways to do that, but for those of us who really dig Zen and who really kind of vibe with this lineage, that's kind of the best way to do it for us. To really know that emptiness, to really be familiar with and intimate with this phenomenon of no self, you have to be alone. You have to be in silence, or not have to. For those of us who do Zen, that really seems to work. It's very powerful, that practice of being alone. And, I live here, and you guys are like my people to a certain extent. And so I'm always surprised when I do go out into the world how many people really are incapable, or seemingly incapable, tell themselves that they're incapable of being alone with their thoughts, especially now with phones and digital access to everything. I'm amazed at how many people, both old and young, the minute there's a moment of silence, they're reaching for some kind of music, some kind of podcast, some kind of something. So I'm just really appreciative to be in a community of people who do want to honor that practice of aloneness and silence and how powerful that can be. Um, and so that's how we cultivate that familiarity with the absolute, and then making sure that we do that in sangha, in community with other people, really helps to hone how we manifest that absolute reality within the relative reality of differences and diversity and separate things, right? Um, and so doing it with Sangha, doing it with people, going out with my group, sitting in session with all of you, is just such an important aspect of manifesting our practice and revealing our edges, right? Like we're supposed to bump up against each other. We're supposed to have conflict. We're supposed to reveal each other's limitations. We're supposed to get frustrated and angry. That means Sangha is working. There was a long period, like during COVID, and even after that, not many people were coming here. Most of our stuff was on Zoom. Most of the residents were like staying in their house all the time. And everything was like really peaceful here. There was like no brush ups, no conflicts, no nothing. And that was cool, right? Like peace is cool. Um, but when you really start to come together and have to talk about why this isn't clean and why that didn't get done and how come that noise has to happen, why are you like all that stuff really reveals where I become impatient, where my limitations are, where my preferences lie. And studying that is how we get to let go, how we get to understand our conditioning and our patterns. And only through understanding and facing those conditions and patterns can we learn to be liberated from them. So that was kind of my dive into group practice and alone practice and the importance of them both. And so I've just been really thinking about that. And so I wanted to look into some Buddhist texts and teachings that kind of address it. And so I first just kind of wanted to share something from Yasutani Roshi. Yasutani Roshi was a teacher of, he's kind of, in a way, our Dharma great uncle, if that makes any sense, right? So Taizan Maizumi Roshi was Seisen's teacher, one of Seisen's teachers. And then Maizumi studied with a number of people, one of whom was Yasutani Roshi. He's a Japanese cat. And Yasutani did koan stuff and Soto stuff, so that kind of Soto and Rinzai lineage happening with Yasutani, which we see because Yasutani was also Robert Aitken's teacher. If anyone knows Robert Aitken, he started a Sangha back in the earlier 20th century in Hawaii, and he's kind of like the first American Zen master, or one of the first American Zen masters. So Yasutani has like a huge imprint on American Zen, and after you finish the koan curriculum here in our lineage, then you study the precepts, right? And the precepts are kind of like basically just kind of 10 guidelines for Buddhist ethical practice. That's kind of a quick way to present the precepts. And the way we study the precepts is through a piece of text that Yasutani gave us. And he gives a lot of commentary and elaboration on the precepts and the three treasures. The three pure precepts is kind of a whole study thing. But I just kind of wanted to read what he says about the Sangha treasure, right? This practice of being together. So the Japanese word for Sangha is translated as beings living in harmony. In the three treasures, the place of, I can skip that, that gets complicated. When two or more Buddhist disciples discard the self for the Dharma, continuously help each other, exert themselves in the practice of the Buddha's way, and strive to spread the teaching to all beings, they are called the Sangha treasure. Strictly speaking, even those who live and practice alone cannot be called Sangha. Whether you're ordained as a monk or a householder Buddhist disciple. The manifested Sangha treasure consists of all those who have become Buddhist by receiving the Buddhist precepts. The manifested Sangha treasure is the Sangha to be found in each period of history. That's interesting. So yeah, he's obviously just pointing out how important it is to practice with folks. And in fact, the basic thesis of this section of the study is the practice of the Buddha's Dharma is the Sangha treasure. So in other words, he's saying there is no separation between being with folks and practicing the Buddha's way. If you are not doing it with people, then you are not practicing the Buddha's way. And that kind of harkens back to this famous story that I think someone mentioned a few weeks ago. Maybe it was Kyoshin, but the famous story where Ananda, who was one of the Buddha's first students and disciples, he comes to the Buddha and he says, "Hey Buddha, it seems to me that having spiritual friends is half of the holy life." And the Buddha says, "No, Ananda, having spiritual friends is the whole of the holy life." So really pointing to the importance of doing this together. And for, in line with this talk, the importance of seeing Sangha everywhere. This says particularly this piece from Yasutani is talking like, no, it's only people who have dedicated themselves to Buddhist practice. And there's something important in that. That's kind of what binds us here. We're all very different people. And the one thing that really brings us together is us being like, yo, I really want to not sit in bed and watch news this morning. I want to come to the yurt or on Zoom and learn about this Buddha way. But outside of that, even an a cappella group or your coworkers or your family, how can I live in those groups really intentionally and seeing that as a Sangha and allowing the ebbs and flows of those communities to inform my practice and to help me wake up. I think that's really important. Reminds me of the third Bodhisattva vow that we say all the time, Dharma gates are everywhere, right? So everything you're doing, even the Broy a cappella group, they're my Sangha, they are a Dharma gate. And I encourage everyone, and especially myself, to see all groups and all communities as presenting that opportunity for practice all the time. So that's the group Sangha side. And then to kind of highlight the importance of aloneness in Buddhist practice, I thought of another kind of famous koan. Seisen quotes it all the time. Seisun wishes she could be here, by the way. She's just still kind of feeling icky. She never tested positive, but she's convinced she has long COVID because she still has a little cough and is just kind of out of it. So she's really trying to heal, but she says hello to everyone. Um, on the alone side, yeah. So this is case 26 in the Blue Cliff Record, which is one of the books of koans that we do here. It's also called the Hekigan Roku in Japanese. So case 26, a monk asks Hyakujo, what is the very special thing? Or other translations say, what is the extraordinary way of the Buddha? Or something like that. What is the special thing? Why are we all here? What is it that I can wake up to that can liberate me from my regular deluded life? What is the very special thing? And Hyakujo says, sitting alone on Daiyu Peak. The monk then gives a bow, and Hyakujo hits him. That's the koan. So, I think on one level, and particularly for the purposes of this talk, we can take it on face value that sitting alone, finding time in my life to be alone, be silent, is special. That is a special thing, especially in today's society. Like I said, so many people are just riddled with anxiety the minute they have a moment of silence. And so it is precious. And probably even back in the Buddha's day, I think it's just human to be afraid of being alone with my thoughts. And that's okay. I think that's really natural. I still get kind of anxious every time I come down just for 30 minutes of zazen in the morning. There's still, after 20 years of doing this, I'm still like, oh God, I don't want to be quiet. It's hard. It's always going to be hard. So yeah, it is special being alone, being silent. But to really do this koan justice, I think it's pointing to something very different. Which is, Hyakujo was a master in the 8th century in China. He was kind of like a major dude at the time. Daiyu Peak, right? He says sitting alone on Daiyu Peak. Daiyu Peak is the mountain where his monastery was. So he's basically saying just being here is the very special thing. And because we know he was a big master and he kind of formed new ways of monastic living, he was like a guy, right? So we know that there were a grip of cats up at his temple, right? He was not alone. He's got tons of people up there with him. So why does he say alone? And I think he's really pointing to, and what working with this koan actually is a kind of intimacy with this capital A alone, which I think points to this kind of absolute oneness. If everything in fact is one, if I can truly manifest oneness, then there is no separation. There's no such thing as another person. So this great aloneness means you're totally one with everything. Always, right where you are, right here on Daiyu Peak, or for us, right here at Sweetwater Zen Center in National City. Or if you're sitting on the toilet in the morning, right on the toilet, right there is complete capital A aloneness, just one with everything, nothing separate. So I think that is really what he's pointing to, and that is such a beautiful way of showing, at least for me, blurring the lines between alone and with people. This idea that I was just in this situation with a bunch of people and now I'm alone, and they're very different. It's kind of a delusion, right? I mean, on face value, they are very different, right? At a huge party, alone in my room. Sure, we know how that's different. But if we can really open up to the fact that we are all beings in every moment, then you're always alone and you're never alone, all at the same time. And to differentiate between the two really kind of starts to become irrelevant. So I thought this koan was super powerful in opening that up for me. Um, and it points to that kind of absolute and relative thing too, that both of those, yes, are different: oneness and emptiness, diversity and separation. But really, when we get to be intimate with those, they are one and the same. And to talk about them differently, it misses the point. And that's very hard to see, and that's kind of what our whole practice is about. Years and years and lifetimes of investigating emptiness and fullness, togetherness, aloneness, all of these dualistic ways of thinking about things. How can they kind of dissipate into just this? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. I hope it does something for y'all. I don't, you know, I don't know. But, this has definitely given me an appreciation for Sweetwater Zen Center as well, because I think that we do both of these things really well. I think that we encourage folks, we, at least offer lots of opportunities to be alone and to be silent and to really investigate that practice. And I think we do a really good job of doing Sangha, right? We have our residency here, which presents its, inherent interpersonal dramas. And we do these Sangha nights where we get together and have fun. And it's just such a kind and open community. We just had a meeting yesterday. We're like working on building a new community space here in the backyard that's going to be super cool and artistic and a great way for people to come together. So I hope that everyone comes and hangs out here and really enjoys our Sangha and our aloneness practice, and helps us to support both of those endeavors, even though they are not different things. So